Shine within our hearts, loving Master, the pure light of your divine knowledge, and open the eyes of our minds that we may comprehend the message of your gospel. Instill in us also reverence for your blessed commandments, so that having conquered all sinful desires, we may pursue a spiritual life, thinking and doing all those things that are pleasing to you. For you, Christ our God, are the light of our souls and bodies, and to you we give glory together with your Father, who is without beginning, and your all holy, good, and life-creating Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen. Dear brothers and sisters, today's Gospel is the 12th Gospel of Luke, and it talks about the 10 lepers who come to Christ to be cleansed. And this is what the text says. At that time, as Jesus entered a village, he was met by 10 lepers, who stood at a distance and lifted up their voices and said, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. When he saw them, he said to them, Go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving him thanks. Now he was a Samaritan. Then said Jesus, Were not 10 cleansed? Where are the 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well. Dear brothers and sisters, this gospel has a lot of lessons for us to learn from, and we will talk about every aspect of it slowly. Jesus entered into a village where they accepted him, and 10 lepers came to him, raising up their voices and asking for mercy. First of all, we see here that it is a part of the society in ancient Israel that comes to Christ, who has been excluded from the rest of the people. These 10 men who were lepers at that time lived in leper colonies outside of main population where everybody else lived. And these people come to Christ because, as we see in the gospel that was read on Friday on the feast of Saint Anthony, Christ tells his disciples as he preaches that blessed are those who are poor, blessed are those who are mourning, blessed are those who are hungry. And connecting these two gospels, we can see how these lepers could find their way to Christ, because that's who he came for. And leprosy was considered contagious at the time, and people were afraid of being in any communication with them. So Christ here relates to a part of society that is excluded and marginalized, and he gives them the blessing of cleansing. Here we see that he doesn't cleanse them himself immediately at the site where they were asking for the blessing, but he sends them off to see the priests. That was the custom of the day. That's how anybody who was cleansed from any uncleanness was handled according to the tradition. And that also tells us about other aspect of this, that leprosy was not only considered a regular illness, sickness, and disease, but it also had the concept of uncleanness, that anybody who was cleansed from leprosy could not simply enter into the society, but had to show themselves to the priests to be declared clean, that they could actually enter into the society. And Christ does not break that law. He follows the rule of the time, and he sends the lepers to the priests. Not only for the fact that they could enter into the society only after they were proven by the priests, but also as a witness to them that by God's mercy their leprosy has been cleansed. And that mercy that has cleansed their leprosy comes through Christ, comes from Christ, that He is the one who had mercy on them. So that's the first part. They raise up their voices. That shows that they actually stand up for themselves. Because in this condition, when someone is marginalized and cast out of the society, their self-esteem, their dignity is lowered halfway. And they sometimes weren't treated as humans, and they slowly themselves entered into a spiritual and psychological state of mind that they themselves did not respect their personhood. They considered themselves punished by God. They considered themselves unworthy of entering into the society. But here Christ shows that even the least of the least in the society is worthy to receive the blessings of the Lord and receive cleansing. Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. They call Him Master. That is a title that could be given to God, that the only Master of the universe is God Himself, and these people come to Christ like the blind Bartimaeus and other people who recognize the divinity of Christ, and they call Him a Master. In Mark's and Matthew's Gospel, similar stories tell us that they actually kneel in front of Him and ask for cleansing. If you wish, they say in the other Gospels, we may be cleansed. If you will, we may be cleansed. Years ago, we made a program on Lord's Prayer, where we talked about your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is a very deep concept that is important to always recognize, that it is the breaking of the will of God on earth that creates chaos and disaster. In this case, the lepers come to Christ and they admit that the will of God has to be manifest on earth, and the result of which they will receive mercy, and that will cause their cleansing. And Christ does will the cleansing of the lepers, and He sends them off. And go and show yourselves to the priests. We already spoke about this concept where Christ talks about them to go and show themselves to the priests, because that was the ritual, that was the custom and a habit and the tradition, that's the only way they could be restored. But a second reason for that is that they will witness about the power of God, the mercy of God flowing through Christ. On Friday's Gospel, as I quoted earlier, when Christ comes and stands in a level place, it says, many people crowd around Him. Many are touching Him because power flew out of Him. Power came out of Him and healed them. So we have spoken about the communion with Christ, and those who were able to touch Him, get into a close proximity and relate with Him, through that relationship, their condition was restored to the original condition, to the condition of health, which is in Christ's case a recreation, of the human being. So these people, as the other ones from that other gospel that was read on Friday, come to Christ to close proximity, and they ask for His mercy that flows out of Him. In this case, as He's willing to do that. In other cases, like in the case of the woman who had a blood flow, even by touching, even by getting close to Him. And as they went, they were cleansed. So the process of cleansing happens not immediately, not in the sight when they are standing by Christ, but He sends them off, and that's when they are cleansed. That speaks about a very unique psychological state of mind. When we are at the presence of the doctor and the doctor heals us, that has a different kind of repercussions in our mind than when we are away and so all of a sudden the leprosy starts going away. In the case of modern medicine, when we are away, we actually receive the medication, we take the medication, and as we take the medication, we can see the results of the medicine on our healing. But in this case, things are invisible, things are unseen, and Christ simply tells them to go show themselves to the priests. And in the process, as they go further from Christ, their cleansing occurs. And in the result, these people lose perhaps their trust. And there is also the other aspect. When we go to God for a specific request, we ask from God that specific thing, and we receive it. It seems like our relationship with God ends with the reception of the gifts. And as I've spoken before, we value the gift more than the giver of the gifts. And in this case, 10 lepers go away cleansed, and one of them returns to the gift giver. One of them is not satisfied only with the gift, but he desires more. He wants further relationship with Christ. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. And he fell on his face at Jesus' feet, giving Him thanks. Dear brothers and sisters, in this one person's case, we clearly see that his relationship with Christ is a creator-creature relationship, where he falls on his face, showing that he is worshiping Christ in that scene, that he recognizes that he is God. No one else could have cleansed leprosy by just sending them off to see the priests. No one else could by word alone heal this kind of disease. And we see in the case of the centurion, where the centurion's faith is so great, so powerful, that he says to Christ, you don't have to come into my house, but by word alone, if you say, it will happen. And Christ says that He has never found such a great faith even in Israel. And in this case also seems like this man was not an Israelite, he was a foreigner, Christ says. No one else came back but this foreigner. And the foreigner was a Samaritan. He falls in front of Christ on his face, and with loud voice he glorifies God and he thanks Christ. These are all parallel sentences. He is glorifying God, he is thanking God, he is glorifying Christ, he is thanking Christ. He is at the feet of Christ, but in a sense, he recognizes that he is at the feet of the incarnate God, that he has found the Lord, and his sorrow has ended. And in the gospel of the Friday's gospel, we see that Christ says, "Blessed are those who are mourning now. Blessed are those who are hungry now. Blessed are those who are marginalized now, those who are excluded from the society, because they will find reconciliation, they will find comfort, they will rejoice," Christ says. And that rejoicing, dear brothers and sisters, is connected directly with our relationship with God. These men and women who were marginalized by the society into colonies where they lived by themselves, out of sight, out of mind, those were the ones who were mourning. Those were the ones who were hungry, and those were the ones who had been excluded. When we hear the gospel telling us about the blessings, Sermon on the Mountain, where Christ talks about the 10 blessings that he gives to his disciples and those who were surrounding him, he talks about this category of people. Sometimes we put ourselves into that category. We say, "Oh, I am poor because I cannot buy the most expensive car," or "My house is smaller than the house next door, and therefore I am poor, so Christ is talking about me. I missed my breakfast and I am hungry and it's already lunchtime. Oh, Christ is talking about me." Or at work, I made some mess around in my relationship with my friends and they don't want to hang out with me. Oh, I am marginalized, therefore Christ is talking about me. But that's not what Christ talks about. He talks about extreme severe case. He talks about people like these lepers, people who couldn't value even themselves, that had lost their human dignity, not only in the eyes of the society, but in the eyes of themselves. And he's talking about that extreme mourning of the loss of humanity, and that will be restored. And that causes an extreme humility, and in cases even despair. So he is here to take people out of despair by their humility. Some people who, in this case we see 9 of them, were also in that condition, but they had not gained the humility to return back to the gift giver. And in this case, Christ talks about those who are hungry, but those also who recognize that the gift giver is God, and that when you receive your gifts, you are to thank God. And the thankfulness is not a tit-for-tat reality. It is not a transactional reality where you receive something and you give thanks for that particular gift, but you give thanks to the gift giver, knowing the greatness of the person, knowing and recognizing their existence as a gift of itself. And then the thanksgiving becomes a quality of a human heart. A thankful human being becomes the ultimate goal of God's creation. And God wants us to be like that. And Christ, in this case, notices that particular reality, that this man could have left because he had already received his gift and he was at a distance. He had to take the trouble and come back and find Christ and thank him. That talks about not a transactional relationship, because a distance creates a difficulty of pursuing what you're thinking. And as we have a difficulty of pursuing our goals, that talks about our consistency our persistency in our goals, and he talks about the strength of faith and the strength of conviction that this is what we are supposed to be doing. It also could be that those people had reached that point of despair where they had cut their trust with God so badly that even after restoration of their health were not able to come and find a continuation in their humanity. And in this case, Christ is surprised. Was not one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And he said to him, "Rise and go your way. Your faith has made you well." In this case, dear brothers and sisters, we see that he doesn't only restore the health, the physical health of this man, but also his dignity, his humanity. He calls him well. He tells him that his faith has made him well. The others did not have enough faith to be cured from the disease and also be made well as human beings. And that's the most important aspect of this gospel, that we all are spiritual lepers. Our souls are covered with sores and decay, and that is caused by our separation from God. And that decay and leprosy of spiritual kind finds its reflection in our physical life, in our day-to-day relationships, in our conducting our business in this world. And that causes a lamentation. And when we go to God for the problems that we have in a visible part of our life, and we find solutions for them, we briefly in passing thank God and forget about Him until the next problem rises. However, what our goal should be is to continuously be in communion with God through the process of worship and thanksgiving, as this leper does, to find a permanent solution to our problems that we experience in this life. And in that way, if we recognize ourselves as those who are mourning, as those who are hungry, as those who are marginalized in the world, considering the problems and the difficulties that we face in our lives, and we restore our relationship with God, and we restore the dignity of human being in us by relating to the Creator whose image is fading away in our hearts, then our problems will permanently be resolved. And as Christ promises in the gospel that we read on Friday, we will rejoice. We will rejoice because the joy itself comes from God. We experience small portions, small glimpses of joy with every small success that we have in life. Every small gift that is given to us shines a small portion of joy that we could have continuously if we were in the presence of the gift giver at all times. That if we recognized that all gifts, all success, all solutions of life come ultimately in its final state, come from the Creator who knows every need and every problem in our life. He knows everything that we need. He knows all the problems that we have, and He wants us to turn to Him so those things will be eliminated from our lives. And that happens by spiritual and physical wellness. And Christ here gives the first part of the gift to the 9 lepers. He cleanses them physically. He solves their problem because they ask. And secondly, he only restores the wellness of spiritual kind, a wellness of totality of the human being to this one person who comes back and praises and thanks him, telling him directly that he recognizes that he could not have any of the gifts without the gift giver. So, dear brothers and sisters, we will conclude here. And just a reminder that on Friday we were reading the Gospel for the feast of Saint Anthony the Great. And Anthony the Great is an example of persuasion, of following God. Anthony the Great, as a young man, placed himself into a place of hunger, into a place of poverty, into a place of mourning for his spiritual well-being. And throughout 40 and more years of living in the desert, he reached the joy of spiritual communion with God. And that is why that gospel was read on Friday. Anthony the Great represents also the young man who comes into the church and hears the gospel, go sell everything, give it to the poor, and come and follow me. And in that case, Christ talked to a young man in Israel, but Anthony, hearing this hundreds of years later, follows immediately and later becomes the diamond of the desert. He attracts hundreds and thousands of people who come to him for advice, who come to him for blessings that flow through him from God to the world. And he, by himself and through the help of his disciples and those who come to him, transforms the world around him. So let us go to Christ and ask for spiritual wellness, for healing of our souls and bodies, and like this leper, the Samaritan one, come to him all the time, return to him and thank him and glorify God. Thank you, and see you later.